Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is another old TV show. It's Miami Vice. I'm just going to talk about season 1. This comes from the complete Miami Vice box set, which interestingly enough is an 18 certificate here in the UK. The film that came out in 2006 was only a 15. Granted, there is strong scenes of smoking in the TV show, so maybe that might be what it's an 18 for. Obviously, there's drug use as well. This is one of those shows that I wasn't allowed to watch as a child when it first came out. I mean, it was started in 1984 in the States. I'm not exactly sure when it came to the UK, but I do remember it was when I was still in primary school. So that's a long time ago. But I remember not being allowed to watch it until later, so some of the early episodes I have no recollection of whatsoever. There is no extras, certainly in season 1, it's just 5 discs, so the episodes are at least spread out almost 5 episodes a disc. It's in 4:3 aspect ratio. It does look really nice. And the thing about Miami Vice, the TV show, it's kind of one of the most important TV shows in American history. It laid the groundwork for a lot of things that would be copied. It's funny because when Michael Mann made Miami Vice in 2006, one of the criticisms of the film was it didn't have 80s kitsch, and it wasn't camp, and it was too dark. It's like, obviously the people that criticise it for that never actually watched the TV show, because the TV show, yes, there's some bright lights and glamour, but that's mainly in the opening titles. The show does go into the drug addict problem. It shows homelessness, and if you actually look, the streets of Miami are actually fairly grimy and dirty, so it's not this kind of 80s camp kitsch that some people seem to think it is. Of course, there's some scenes in discotheques. Of course, some of the songs in the soundtrack haven't aged that well, like a fair bit of 80s music. You know, there's a saying that not many artists who started before the 80s kind of survived the 80s as far as the production style, the use of drum machines instead of proper drums, overuse of synths and stuff like that. There's not that many artists that actually survived the 80s without doing a bit of damage to their overall canon of work. So really the kind of knock on this is really completely unfounded. Because this is fairly dark and fairly gritty. I'm just going to go through it episode by episode, so unfortunately I will be referring to my notes because I've got about 3 pages of them. It was created by Anthony Yerkovich, not Michael Mann. Obviously Michael Mann is kind of synonymous with Miami Vice, but he was executive producer. He was kind of looked on as kind of the godfather of the show, but he never directed any episodes. He only co-wrote 1 episode, and then after, or mid-season 2, he kind of left to go start doing Crime Story, which is another really underrated TV show that needs a Blu-ray release. So he kind of went and did his own thing, even though he was still kind of credited as executive producer. But it's interesting, as I say, because he never actually directed any episodes and only co-wrote 1 of them. Obviously, it started the careers of Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas as Crockett and Tubbs. even though it's one of those shows that kind of followed those two actors about. And yes, Don Johnson did some films, but he was always kind of Sonny Crockett. The same way for me, Andre Braugher from Homicide, Life in the Street will always be Frank Pembleton, even though he's obviously went on to have success with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but for me, he'll always be Frank. So the pilot episode obviously introduces the two characters. Tubbs is introduced, he works in Brooklyn, so he comes from New York on the trail of a drug smuggler called Daron. And this is the guy that Don Johnson is after as well, for an incident that happens near the start of the programme, of the episode. This one, Brother's Keeper, was released as a kind of feature, not in the cinemas, but it was a kind of feature-length episode as well. It co-stars Bill Smitrovich, who would appear in Manhunter and Crime Story as well. Michael Etty Williamson, who much later would be in Michael Mann's Heat, and Jimmy Smits in an early role. Obviously, one of the other things with Miami Vice is there's so many small roles for actors that would become a lot more famous later on. Don't worry, I'll try and keep on top of that as it goes. So we're introduced to the characters, Trudy and Gina, the two female cops who get to pose as prostitutes quite a lot. That is Miami Vice after all. And then you've got the two, kind of the B team, who are essentially the comic relief, even though they do get an episode themselves later. And the lieutenant, played by Gregory Sierra, which might be a bit strange if you just have a passing interest in the show, because obviously somebody slightly more famous becomes a lieutenant in a little bit. So the first two episodes are pretty fantastic. We're also introduced to Martin Ferrero, who is the lawyer that gets eaten in Jurassic Park, I believe. He's in, well, after the end of season 1, out of the 22 episodes, he's in 4 of them as different characters. In this one, he plays a cross-dressing hitman. And Cyndi Lauper is on the soundtrack, Phil Collins in The Air Tonight. And again, a lot of the tone of the 2006 film is in these episodes about Calderon, the Colombian drug dealer. There's actually about 4 episodes in the first season that if you kind of take bits out of all of them, you actually come close to the 2006 film. Episode 2, Heart of Darkness, which co-stars Ed O'Neill with Married with Children fame. And he plays an FBI agent who is deep undercover in the porn world, and perhaps a little bit too deep. Episode 3 is Cool Running, which is about a Jamaican gang who are shooting people up with automatic weapons, including 2 young cops who are trying to keep up with Crockett and Tubbs. And then we have episode 4 and episode 5, The Hit List, and Calderon's Return, which again has a lot to do with the film from 2006, as Crockett and Tubbs go to the Bahamas to try and stop Calderon, and these episodes are pretty fantastic. Again, the shades of Manhunter. This was 1984, 85, and obviously Manhunter by Michael Mann was 1986. And these couple of episodes have got a lot of Manhunter in them, as far as the locations and the look of it. Then we have 6, which is One-Eyed Jack, which features the wonderful Dennis Farina, who obviously would work with Michael Mann and Manhunter and Crime Story. Dan Hedia appears as an internal affairs agent who's trying to bust Sonny. I should say, after episode 4, a major character dies. I won't say who, but by episode 6, Edward James Olmos is here. And Edward James Olmos pretty much actually steals the show, because we're so used to police chiefs and bosses of cops doing lots of shouting and screaming. You've got 24 hours to bust this case. But Edward James Olmos is almost monosyllabic in most of his scenes. He's very brooding and intense. Doesn't say a lot, but means a lot. And it's just the complete antithesis of 99.9% of bosses of famous detectives and TV shows. He doesn't do a lot of talking, but he means it. The next episode, No Exit, about a gun dealer who's trying to sell missiles, directed by David Soul, and featuring Bruce Willis, who in 1985, obviously Moonlighting, I think, was just about to start. Then obviously he would get somewhat more famous after that. Episode 8, The Great McCarthy, again features Martin Ferrero in another performance. Again, it's about a smuggler, and Tubbs gets involved with a woman. Every now and again, Crockett and Tubbs get involved with a woman they shouldn't. Number 9 is Glades, which features John Pankow, who would be in To Live and Die in LA, which is almost like a Miami Vice episode with William Friedkin. They're protecting a witness and he runs away to the Everglades, so they follow him, get lost, and then end up in a rescue attempt of a kidnapped child. As you do. Then we get Give a Little, Take a Little in episode 10, which has Burt Young as a sleazy pimp. With Lenny Van Doan from Twin Peaks, and Michael Madsen is in this episode, and Terry O'Quinn is in this episode. And again, it's another really good one. This one features a lot of Gina, because she is undercover as a prostitute, and she has to go and do things that she really doesn't want to do, really shouldn't have to, but things happen. Episode 11, Little Prince, which is about a rich boy who gets caught with dope, and it turns out his father is a big drug dealer, even though he obviously does it through his business, so it doesn't look that way. That's a nice little episode. That features Giancarlo Esposito in a small role. He would get another role in an episode later in the series. There was actors that they would use in little roles again, and then they might get a bigger part. And then we have episode 12, Milk Run, which has an appearance by Eric Bogason, featuring some more ZZ Top in the soundtrack. This is about two kids who want to go to Colombia to get some drugs and come back and sell them and open a big nightclub in New York. Also, that doesn't go that well. Then we have episode 13, The Golden Triangle, which is another excellent episode. We learn more about Castillo's, Edward James Olmos, Lieutenant Castillo's background and history, and we get a fairly large bombshell about that, and that features Joan Chen, who of course would be coming to Twin Peaks quite soon. Episode 14 was Golden Triangle Part 2, which was co-written by Michael Mann. And it starts off with Edward James Olmos in trunks. So if you're shocked by David Farrar in shorts and Black Narcissus, prepare to be ultra shocked by James Edward Olmos in trunks. Heavens to Murgatroyd. Smuggler Blues, this stars Glenn Frey and Richard Edson in an early role, and Richard Jenkins, who looks old in 1985 and he still looks pretty much exactly the same now. Again, Crockett and Tubbs have to go to Colombia and pretend to be drug smugglers because there's a couple of bent cops who are killing drug smugglers. Episode 16 has John Turturro and Pam Grier. I mean, come on, you can't ask for much more than that. It's about a high-class prostitute ring under the guise of a model agency that John Turturro works for. Pam Grier, who has previous with Tubbs, comes to find her sister, who's been involved in this. I mean, a lot of these, again, the people who claimed that this was too dark really need to watch the series again, because most of these don't end in happy endings. Again, I think this was an influence on perhaps David Simon and Homicide: Life in the Street to some extent, as far as there's not a lot of black and white in Miami Vice, especially in the endings. There's a lot of grey. Not, the bad guy doesn't always get punished, or justice doesn't always work. That was kind of more prevalent in Homicide: Life in the Street. Episode 17 is called The Maze, and that co-stars J.O. Sanders, the wonderful Joe Morton, and Ving Rhames in an early role, and it's essentially a version of The Raid. So these kids shoot a neighbourhood up, shoot a cop dead, and then run to this apartment building called The Maze, and it's essentially The Raid. Number 18, Made for Each Other, which is about counterfeit money, which co-stars Mark Lynn Baker and Ellen Green. Number 19 is one of the best episodes of all time, I think. The Home Invaders, directed by Abel Ferreira, who was coming off of Fear City, I believe. Starring David Patrick Kelly, Paul Calderon, who was obviously a Abel Ferreira regular. And that's strangely enough about Home Invaders, but it's really good. And we see some hockey masks that might reappear in Heat 10 years later. But that's a really good episode. Number 20 is Nobody Lives Forever. Again, Martin Ferrero back. Giancarlo Esposito back. Kim Greist makes an appearance as Crockett's new girlfriend. Of course, Kim Greist would be in Manhunter a year later in 1986. And the song Heartbeat, which appears at the end credits of Manhunter, is in this episode as well. That's a really good one, as Sonny's love life is getting in the way of him actually being sharp and focused and in the mood for crime. So that's a really good one. Number 21, Evan, which I would think must be a pretty groundbreaking episode at the time in 1985. It's about, again, gun running, but the guy who's assisting in this deal is a cop that has history with Crockett, because they came up together with another cop who ended up killing himself, and it turns out it's because the cop was gay, and this undercover guy, obviously didn't understand that at the time, railed against them, bad-mouthed them, and arguably drove him to suicide, and Crockett didn't do anything about it. and he talks about how he didn't know how to handle it. And, I mean, again, in 1985, I don't think cop shows were talking about this kind of thing. So that's a really good one. That's topped and tailed by 2 Peter Gabriel songs. Episode 22 is Lombard, which is about the Dennis Farina character who appeared kind of more briefly in an episode before, and it's just a great performance by the wonderful Dennis Farina. He's a mob boss who has got grand jury summons, so he's either going to rat on his associates and go to witness protection, or not grass on them, and he's going to get a contempt prison sentence. It's a really great turn by Dennis Farina, and it's worth buying the box set just for Dennis Farina, let's be honest, because he is absolutely wonderful. So that's like season 1, just as a kind of overview. I'm not sure I'll be doing any more seasons because I don't know when I'll actually get to see another 22 episodes of Miami Vice. But there may be, I think they hold up better than I was actually expecting. It's been a while since I've seen them. There is actually bonus material maybe in the last disc of the last season, but there's certainly no bonus material in season 1 in the actual episode discs. But yeah, I think it's well worth revisiting, especially for all those people who thought this was too dark, because some of the content in the 18 certificate season 1 is just as dark and really just as good. I mean, the first time I saw the 2006 film, I thought it was very good, but maybe not top level Michael Mann. But every time I watch it since, it just kind of goes up in my estimation, because it's just such a fantastic film. As with all Michael Mann films, it looks great and sounds great. And there is, watching the TV show, the season 1, there is a lot of elements from the TV show that he did actually put into the film, so the film is exactly like the TV show, basically. It just perhaps doesn't have an 80s disco scene in it, which obviously upset lots of people. If he'd put an 80s disco scene in it, then everybody would have been happy with the 2006 film or something. So thanks very much for watching this fairly random review of Michael Mann's executive produced Miami Vice Season 1. This is Soldier On from Soldier On Films. You can let me know in the comments below what your favourite episode of Miami Vice Season 1 was, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Soldier Ronan from Soldier On Films. Saying farewell.